Good afternoon and welcome to Skip Stories. True life stories of growing up in small town Minnesota. I was trying to think of a story to do and I heard a song from a group that I've been following lately called the Peterson Family. And they wrote a song called Hey Grandpa. And I listened to it and I thought, I think I can make a story out of that. This story is about a grandfather of mine. I had two grandfathers, everybody has two of them. And I hope this doesn't sound too self-serving, talking about my personal family. But I think he was enough of a character that he deserves somebody to talk about him. He's long gone now. He was raised in small town Minnesota, a little town called Nicollet in Nicollet County. And his name was Henry. As he grew up, he had several interests. First of all, was education. Now, his education stopped in Nicollet when he was 14, I guess. They had no high school. Now, this would be about 1900 when something like that. They put a high school in shortly after that, but at the time they didn't have one. And he wanted a high school education. So he contacted some relatives in Minneapolis. I believe they were an aunt and uncle of his, and made a deal with them that they would give him room and board if he could come and live with them and go to high school. Kind of like some kids go to college today. But this was high school. He went to Minneapolis, stayed with them for 4 years, got a job at a grocery store, gave them the money that he earned there for room and board, and graduated with a high school diploma from Minneapolis. He came back home to Nicollet, and with his high school diploma, he was able to get a good job with the post office. It was his first job. He got a route delivering mail by horseback. Of course, they didn't have any cars then. There were cars around, but not in general use for the post office. And his route was around the local lake, Swan Lake it's called. Now, Swan Lake is about 7 miles long now, big lake, very shallow, but a big lake. And his route was just to the shoreline all the way around. And that took him a day to deliver the mail to those homes on the shores of Swan Lake. He ran into a problem with riding horseback. Was there was wild dogs present. And still a lot of woods around in those days. Now, one of his things in life was he was a naturalist, not studied by, but just by nature and interest. And he didn't want to kill these wild dogs. Now, he found out that wild dogs are worse than wolves were. A wolf will have a natural fear of man and tend to keep away from you unless you really do something bad. But a dog does not have that natural fear of man. So when they go wild, they're worse than wolves. So he had to take care of these dogs somehow, and he didn't want to kill them. He was not a killing type of person. His whole life he never hunted anything. He asked the postmaster at the Nicollet post office if he could carry a gun. And he said, well, if you buy it yourself. So he went and bought a pistol, 32 caliber, I believe it was. And he carried that, not to kill the dogs, but to scare the dogs. And it did work. He managed to keep the dogs away from his horse, mostly. He didn't last long at the post office. He was ambitious as a young man and bought into a what they called a general store in those days. They carried groceries and all sorts of things. Some clothing, and you've all seen them in movies, I'm sure, a general store. He never told anybody, but he got married at that point, and they lived above the store, right in the middle of town. But he saved that gun. He was the one that paid for it, so he kept it. And once again, he had no use for it. He was not a hunter or anything. So he took the gun. He still had the original box for it and original shells, and put them into another box. And he used a girdle box. Now, girdles were pretty common in those days. All the gals wore them, I guess. And put that box, the girdle box, under the cash register, or under the counter by the cash register, because he had that store through the 20s and 30s, and there was a lot of crime in those days. You've seen all the movies about the Dillinger and all of those other bad guys that were around, Al Capone types. And a lot of places were getting robbed because the police departments were not adequate for the crime rate that was going around. However, as long as he had that store, which was quite a while, 30 or 40 years, I believe, he never touched that gun. He never got held up, never had a problem.